So far, we've had two kind of rapid-fire discussions, or say, interactions. This one's going to take a little bit longer. I want to answer the question, or discuss with you the question of, what is the White House? What do we mean when we say the White House? One of the oldest ploys in Washington is to pick up the phone and hear a voice say, "This is the White House calling, I would like." When you've been around as long as I have been, you learn to say something like, the White House is a place, not a person, and where in the White House do you reside? And so that generally solves that particular issue. What do we mean when we talk about the White House? We mean a number of things. Basically, we mean three things. We mean the president. The guy at the top, the place where the buck stops. But beneath the president, we have a group of 50 to 60 assistants, special assistants, counselors, deputy assistants. They all have different titles and different names. But we refer to them collectively by the term White House staff. Steve Bannon's official title was, or public title was, strategist. Actually, he was a special assistant to the president. The White House staff are the president's eyes, ears, and hands. They keep the president informed of things, and they take the first steps to undertake liaison between the president himself, the person, and by extension the office, and the outside world. Members of the White House staff usually are, in many cases, are people who have known the president for a very, very long time. He has trust in members of the White House staff. If they do not know the president personally, or have not known him, it's darn certain that they know or are close to some people who have known the president for a long time and who have recommended him for that job. Most have distinguished themselves in two respects. They have demonstrated an area of specialized knowledge in a functional area, such as economics, business, conservation, something of that sort. But more important, they have all had extensive, or often had, political experience as well. So the White House must be seen as consisting of the president at the very top, and then a group of 50 to 60. In the 1930s, it was like 3 or 4, or 50 to 60 experts, assistants, deputy assistants, counselors, special assistants, and so on. These are the names you see. The Trump White House has been distinguished by the inflow and outflow of members of the White House staff. It's unique in my experience to see such turnover within the first year. That is because, clearly, I think, they do not have the trust of the president, rightly or wrongly, which is an important point. The White House staff must have the trust of the president. It's what gives them their clout. It's what gives them their ability to move through things. So, what's the White House? It's the president. It's the White House staff. Beneath the White House staff, there are 11, count them, 11 agencies. These comprise what is known as the Executive Office of the President. We're not going to go through all 11 of them. They're in the book. But I will mention just a few. They exist to give the president specialized information on particular subjects. and to perform certain other coordination functions. First is the Office of Management and Budget. Remember when we talked about the legislature, we talked about the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office? Well, now we also talk about the OMB. It's the job of the OMB to figure out what the president's plans are going to cost. Interestingly, CBO and OMB usually are pretty much together on these issues. Remember we used the word scoring? Oftentimes it's scoring, that is to figure out how much something's going to cost, both in terms of money and in human costs. Sometimes it's important for a president to use the scoring of the CBO rather than the OMB. So that way he can claim he's using Congress's numbers and not his own. Sometimes it is to his advantage to use OMB, Office of Management and Budget. Something that is even more important than this, obviously, is what is known as the NSC, the National Security Council. The NSC consists of a small number of people, by which I mean maybe 100, or even less, or even fewer, divided regionally. The President's National Security Advisor, the NSC Chair, General McMaster, is responsible for taking the products of all the various intelligence agencies around town, putting them into some kind of coherent fashion, and making them available to the president, giving him the best information. The NSC provides information that allows the president to make a decision. The NSC inevitably also participates in the process of making the decision. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Homeland Security are all members of the National Security Council. A third point, a third member of the Executive Office of the President is what is called the United States Trade Representative. That's a funny sounding thing. The U.S. Trade Representative, the USTR, is responsible for, again, formulating policy with respect to its impact on United States trade. President Trump is talking about renegotiating NAFTA, a North American Free Trade Association between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. The USTR is very important in all of this. Their recommendations and their data are essential to the president's making that decision. If we think the Chinese are deliberately pegging their currency at an abnormally low rate, the USTR will be called in to make a judgment about that. There'll be other people as well, from the Treasury and so on. But the fact is that the USTR is an effort to bring the voice of the president's national constituency, our trade regimen, our traders, our manufacturers, which is our livelihood and everything else. It's an attempt to coordinate their inputs into the policy process. There are others. You've all heard of the drug czar. They're trying to find one now. But you get the idea. So, when we talk about the White House, we are talking about the president, we're talking about the White House staff, and we are talking about the executive office of the president. Beneath that, there are how many? 15 or so cabinet offices. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Health and Housing and Urban Development. There's so many I just can't keep the names. Here the bureaucracy gets really large. This is what people mean by the bureaucracy. Okay? So we've already covered two things, haven't we? We have talked about what we mean by the White House, and we've set up a discussion of what we mean by the bureaucracy. They are not the same. Very often, the White House has to work very hard to get the support of the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy must be very careful so that it gets the support of the White House. That is a dynamic that we'll talk about in just a minute.